One of the most misunderstood parts of knee replacement rehabilitation is the difference between being active and actually rebuilding strength. Those are not always the same thing. You can walk every day and still have significant quadriceps weakness. Are you ready to get back to what you love after knee replacement? The Total Knee Success Podcast is your trusted guide with practical tips, evidence-based strategies, and no fluff. It's not personal medical advice, just solid education to help you manage pain, regain mobility, and get back to living the life you love. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Total Knee Success Podcast. I'm Michelle. Have you found yourself wondering why things still feel weak even though surgery is over? Are you walking more but still struggling with stairs, standing up from a chair, or trusting your new knee when you move? Maybe you've been told your progress is going well, but deep down you still feel like the quadricep muscle group is not responding the way you expected it would. Or maybe you keep asking yourself a frustrating question. If the joint has been replaced, why doesn't the strength just come back automatically? By the end of this episode, you'll understand why your quadricep muscle group doesn't always fully wake back up on its own after knee replacement, and what that means for the way strength actually returns over time. Something I hear from people after knee replacement is, I'm doing my exercises, I'm walking more, but things still feel weak. Sometimes they describe the joint as unstable going downstairs. Sometimes they notice they fatigue quickly after standing or walking for longer periods. Other times they say they still cannot feel that muscle working the way they expect it would. And that disconnect can be frustrating because once the arthritic joint has been replaced, many people naturally expect strength to begin returning automatically. Research has shown that quadricep strength can drop by nearly 60% in the first month after knee replacement. And much of that early loss comes from the nervous system temporarily losing the ability to fully activate the muscles. The quadriceps are one of the hardest working muscle groups in the entire body. They help you stand up, climb stairs, control your balance, absorb force while walking, and support the knee joint itself. But after knee replacement, the quad often enters a protective shutdown pattern driven not just by weakness, but also by changes in the nervous system. Researchers often refer to this as arthrogenic muscle inhibition. This is when swelling, irritation, and pain signals after surgery can disrupt the nervous system's ability to fully activate the quadriceps. It's protective. Even a relatively small amount of swelling can reduce how effectively this muscle group activates, which is one reason why strength can fluctuate so much from day to day early on. That muscle group is present, but the communication between the brain and the muscle is not functioning normally yet. In other words, your quad may not be completely offline. It may simply not be activating as efficiently or as consistently as it normally would. And this is one reason the experience can feel so contradictory. You may be working consistently, walking reasonable distances, and fully participating in physical therapy, yet the quadriceps, they still feel delayed, shaky, weak, or somewhat unreliable during certain movements. What surprises many people is how early this shutdown can begin. Studies have shown that significant quadriceps inhibition can occur almost immediately after knee surgery and may persist for months if activation and strengthening are not addressed directly. That's why simply becoming more active does not always effectively restore your strength. Walking and daily movement are both important, but walking alone often does not place enough demand on the quadriceps to reverse significant post-surgical inhibition. And this becomes especially important because many people unknowingly compensate for a weak muscle group. You may lean toward the stronger side when standing up. You may shift weight away from your operated knee when climbing stairs. You may shorten your stride while walking. You may use momentum instead of muscular control. All of these are common. Your nervous system is remarkably adaptive. It will always find an alternative strategy to keep you functioning. But compensation is not the same thing as rebuilding strength and control. This is often the point where people begin feeling stuck, especially if they assume walking more should automatically restore strength. I also want to acknowledge that for anyone dealing with ongoing weakness months after surgery, persistent quadriceps weakness after knee replacement is extremely common, even among highly motivated people who work consistently throughout physical therapy. Because many people are up and moving relatively early, like most everyone, others may not always recognize how much strength, endurance, and control still need to be rebuilt under the surface. A 2025 longitudinal systematic review looking at physical function after total knee arthroplasty highlighted something many people recognize firsthand. Pain reduction does not automatically equal full functional improvement. Functional limitations can persist even after a technically successful surgery. And that disconnect creates some frustration because reduced pain does not automatically restore strength, stability, or movement quality. But restoring strength is a separate process that requires targeted input and progressive loading over time. Just ask your physical therapist. One of the most misunderstood parts of knee replacement rehabilitation is the difference between being active and actually rebuilding strength. Those are not always the same thing. You can walk every day and still have significant quadriceps weakness. You can stay busy, attend therapy appointments consistently, and hopefully you're doing strengthening at therapy if it's indicated at this point in your rehab. But you can do all this and still remain limited because the muscle was never fully reactivated or progressively challenged. That does not mean progress should become aggressive or painful. In fact, pushing too hard too early can increase swelling and irritation, which may worsen muscle inhibition. But it does mean that the quadriceps often require very specific retraining instead of simply hoping normal activity will restore them naturally. Talk to your physical therapist about this. Researchers have repeatedly emphasized the importance of restoring quadriceps activation after knee surgery because strength deficits are associated with poorer movement patterns and functional limitations, unfortunately. One approach that has gained renewed attention is neuromuscular electrical stimulation, or NMES. And this is the electrical stimulation that's sometimes used during rehab to help the muscle contract more effectively. It's also one of those interventions that tends to generate a lot of discussion in rehabilitation because experiences, expectations, and dosing can vary quite a bit from person to person. NMES is not magic, and it's not intended to replace strengthening exercise. Instead, it's typically used alongside exercise. You're actually moving when you're using the electrical stimulation. And this is to help improve quadriceps activation during rehabilitation. And when used correctly and at a sufficient intensity, it may help overcome some of the nervous system inhibition that prevents the quad from activating fully after surgery. I know that this is true. I've seen this work in the clinic multiple times. A 2024 clinical commentary revisiting NMES emphasized something very important. Many previous studies underdosed electrical stimulation, which likely contributed to inconsistent outcomes and mixed perceptions about its effectiveness. The authors argued that sufficient intensity is critical if NMES is going to meaningfully assist quadriceps activation. I encourage this in the clinic. The effort makes a difference in this intervention. Now, does every person need NMES? No. But understanding the concept reinforces an important principle. Quadriceps weakness is not always about effort alone. In many cases, the nervous system itself requires retraining, which is one reason improvement can feel sometimes uneven over time. Does this sound familiar? Some days your new knee feels stronger and more stable. Other days things may feel heavier, less coordinated, or more fatigued again. Fatigue, swelling, pain, poor sleep, stress, inflammation, and activity load can all influence muscular activation. I think this is one of the hardest parts of the process for many people because it challenges the instinct to solve the problem simply by working harder or doing more. You may have spent much of your life solving problems by working harder, so when the quad's not responding, the instinct is often to just do more exercises, more walking, more repetitions. But the nervous system does not always respond well to force or high intensity. Very often it responds better to consistency with gradual exposure, reducing swelling, improving sleep, and exercises performed with very good muscular engagement instead of a rushed repetition. And this is one reason skilled physical therapists spend so much time coaching movement quality rather than just simply counting repetitions. The goal is not merely to finish the exercise. The goal is to reconnect the communication between the brain and the muscle so the muscle group begins participating normally again during the movement. And you may recognize this in yourself at certain points during rehab. It's very common to become more cautious with loading after surgery, especially when swelling is increased or certain movements may feel unstable or unpredictable. But rebuilding quad strength requires gradual challenging the muscle again in a way that's progressive, controlled, and consistent over time. If you avoid loading the muscle for too long because every increase in effort feels like a potential setback, it becomes much harder to rebuild strength, endurance, and confidence. Appropriately progressed strengthening is one of the ways your nervous system gradually relearns that your new knee can tolerate movement and load safely. Strength restoration after knee replacement also tends to happen in phases rather than in one smooth upward line. You may notice meaningful improvement for several weeks and then suddenly feel like things have stalled for a while. Or you may regain walking tolerance before the quadriceps muscle group itself feels strong enough and dependable again. A 2021 cohort study looking at walking speed trajectories after total knee arthroplasty identified different progress patterns during rehabilitation. Yet, people still improved function over time, even when those early patterns looked very different from one another. If you've ever looked at someone else's timeline and wondered why your own strength progress feels slower or less predictable, you're definitely not alone. Two people can have the exact same procedure and experience very different strength timelines afterward. After a while, this may start to affect more than just strength. It begins affecting the way you trust your movement. When quadriceps weakness persists for too long, many people begin losing trust in their new knee, and that loss of confidence changes the way they move throughout the world. They become more hesitant on stairs, more cautious on uneven ground, and more dependent on railings or external support. Some avoid longer outings because fatigue feels unpredictable, while others unconsciously protect their joint during everyday movement. Over time, deeply ingrained compensation patterns can continue long after the surgical tissues themselves have healed. And this is why rebuilding strength is about far more than increasing muscle size. It's also about restoring confidence in movement. That confidence usually grows through repeated evidence. Each successful movement experience helps teach both you and your nervous system that your new knee is becoming safer and more reliable. A smoother sit to stand, steadier stairs, or a longer walk with less fatigue all begin rebuilding trust in your new knee. And those small improvements may seem insignificant in isolation, but together they create the foundation for long-term progress. The nervous system responds to repetition, which is one reason this process can feel mentally exhausting at times. Your brain is constantly reevaluating whether your new knee feels stable, capable, and dependable. And one thing that can be helpful during this stage is paying attention to functional improvement, instead of focusing only on isolated symptoms. Rather than asking whether the quadriceps feel completely normal yet, a more helpful question may be, what are you able to do now that you could not do 6 weeks ago? Looking for functional changes over time often provides a much clearer picture of meaningful improvement. Are you getting out of the chair more easily than you were 6 weeks ago? Can you stand for longer before fatigue sets in? Are you recovering more quickly after an activity? Can you walk farther before everything starts to feel heavy or fatigued? And are stairs becoming smoother and more controlled? These kinds of changes often reflect meaningful neurologic and muscular progress, even before everything feels entirely normal again. And if you're early in this process, it's also important to understand that muscular fatigue after strengthening is not automatically dangerous. Many people become concerned anytime their new knee feels tired or sore after exercise, because it can be difficult to tell the difference between normal muscular fatigue and something that truly needs attention. Certainly, severe swelling spikes, sharp pain, or prolonged flare-ups, they deserve attention and discussion with your medical team. But appropriately dosed strengthening discomfort is often a normal part of rebuilding capacity and restoring function. And one final point before we wrap up today. Rehabilitation after knee replacement is also not a one-size-fits-all. Some people move more quickly into independent strengthening, while others benefit from a more structured support and supervision along the way. Your progress does not need to look identical to someone else's to be successful. I challenge you to stop comparing yourself to other people if that's what you're doing. If your quad feels weak right now, do not assume your opportunity for improvement has already passed. Muscular and neurologic adaptation can continue well beyond the early postoperative period. In the end, improvement usually responds best to patience, progressive loading, consistency, good recovery habits, and active participation in the process. I know you've heard that before. It is worth repeating. Improvement usually responds best to patience, progressive loading, consistency, good recovery habits, and active participation in the process. The quadriceps often require deliberate retraining before strength and control begin returning more consistently. And understanding that process allows you to make better decisions, ask better questions during rehab, and take a more active role in your own long-term outcome. And if this episode helped explain why your new knee still might feel weak even though you're doing everything right, make sure you're signed up for the Total Knee Success Insider newsletter. It's totally free. I share ongoing education and support so you can continue receiving the right information at the right stage of the process. Sometimes having the right explanation at the right time changes the entire experience. Check out the link in the show notes or go to totalkneesuccess.com where you can sign up for the free newsletter. In the next episode, we're continuing this series of the topic that surprises a lot of people: why walking ability and strength do not improve at the same rate after knee replacement, and what that means for how you might interpret your own progress. Thanks for joining me. I'm Michelle, and this has been the Total Knee Success Podcast. This podcast is for educational purposes only. Discover more at totalkneesuccess.com, and be sure to subscribe and share, because every step forward takes you closer to living the life you love.